Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey peeps, today we're going to take a look at Secret Hitler from the team at Cards Against Humanity and designer and head of Cards Against Humanity, Max Temkin. Although this game has nothing to do with Cards Against Humanity, this is actually a game in the same vein and very similar to The Resistance and Werewolf. It's a hidden role team game, and it actually is supposed to take place in the 1930s, as the name implies. This is Hitler is involved. It's actually sort of signifying symbolizing the rise of power of fascists in Germany during the 1930s, leading up to the 40s and World War II. In the game, one team are the liberals, who are trying to pass liberal policies and keep fascism tamped down. The other team secretly are fascists, and one of those fascists, depending on the number of players, there's a certain number of fascists, like in the Resistance, you'll hear that a lot. One of those fascists is Hitler, but of course is secret. So even if the other players find out for sure, somehow or another, that some of the players are fascists, you don't know which one is Hitler, and that's dangerous, because the liberals only win if they pass a certain number of liberal policies, but all the fascists need to do to win is elect Hitler as president secretly, or pass way too many fascist policies. So, let me go ahead and give you a brief look at how the game works, and then we're going to come back, I'll address the elephant in the room, and I'll let you know what I think. Secret Hitler is a competitive team game for 5 to 10 players. One team consists of liberals who are trying to either get 5 liberal policies enacted or execute Hitler if and when that option becomes available. The other team are the fascists, one of whom is Hitler. The fascists win by either enacting 6 fascist policies or by electing Hitler to chancellor after 3 fascist policies have already been enacted. The number of players in the game makes a big difference, since this changes the number of fascists and the number of powers that will be available for the president throughout the game. Choose the appropriate board for the fascist policies, then flip one of the other boards to the liberal side, which is always the same. You'll shuffle up the stack of policy tiles, the majority of which are fascist and the rest being liberal, and place them in the indicated spot. Every player gets handed an envelope with 2 cards randomly inside, a secret role, and a party membership card. The secret role will either be a liberal card, a fascist card, or Hitler himself. The party membership card also says liberal if your secret role is liberal, or fascist if your secret role is fascist or Hitler, which seems very superfluous, right? But when playing at higher player counts, there is a power that allows the president to see only a character's membership card, which means they might identify as a fascist, but not identify whether that fascist is in fact Hitler. Every player also gets a yes and a no card, which will be used in votes to determine the new government each round. Before beginning the game in earnest, someone will lead the group in a small ritual to let the fascists find each other. Everyone will close their eyes, and only the fascists will then open their eyes and identify the other fascists. In a 5 or 6 player game, there are only 2 fascists, including Hitler, so both will open their eyes, and the one who's not Hitler immediately knows who is Hitler. However, with 7 or more players, there are more fascists, and in this case, Hitler keeps his eyes closed and his thumb up, so he doesn't know who the other fascists are, but the fascists know who Hitler is. One player is randomly selected and takes the presidential placard, though they are not actually president yet. Barring extraordinary circumstances, this placard will pass to the next player in clockwise order every round. From this point on, it's important to note that all discussion is allowed except in a couple of situations, and anyone can lie about anything. The primary job of the presidential nominee is twofold: nominating a chancellor to run the country together with him, and if they're both elected, then putting a bill in front of the chancellor that they want to get passed. The Prez will put the Chancellor placard in front of a player of their choice who was not just the Chancellor, and then everyone will secretly vote to affirm or deny this pair by placing one of their 2 vote cards face down in front of them. Then, everyone flips simultaneously. After everyone has had a chance to discuss or defend the results, if there's a clear majority of yes votes, then the selected players are now the new government. If it's a tie or a majority of no votes, the nomination fails, and the presidential placard immediately moves to the next player, and the process begins again. However, you must also move the election tracker up one space. If this happens 3 times, you must flip the top policy tile off the deck and immediately enact it, regardless of what kind of policy it is. This represents chaos in the government. Since the majority of the deck consists of fascist policies, fascists actually like when this happens. Eventually, a government will probably be elected. If 3 fascist policies are already enacted, the newly nominated chancellor must declare if they are Hitler or not. If they're not, that's all that they say. If they are, it's game over and the fascists have won. Assuming that's not the case, and it's a normal round, the president will draw and secretly look at 3 policy tiles, discard one of them face down, and hand the other 2 to the chancellor, all without saying a word or making any other kind of indication. The chancellor, also not saying or doing anything, will choose one of those 2 policies to discard face down and enact the other one. It will immediately be placed on the appropriate board face up, and now players can start screaming at each other. If a certain policy is enacted in this way, it's either because A, the chancellor was given 2 of the same policy and had no choice but to enact one of them, or B, the chancellor was given 2 different policies and specifically chose one of them. Only the president knows for sure which 2 policies were handed to the chancellor, and no one except the president knows what the third tile was that they discarded first. A fascist president who drew 2 fascist policies and a liberal policy might have discarded the liberal policy in order to give the chancellor no choice. A liberal prez might give the chancellor one of each on purpose to force the chancellor to make a choice, or a fascist prez might even do this as cover. Regardless, after the policy is enacted, either the prez or the chancellor might just completely lie in order to cast doubts on the other player. If a fascist policy is enacted, it might cover up a power on the board, which causes the president currently sitting to immediately carry out an executive action. Not all powers are available in every game, depending on the player count. There's Investigate Loyalty, where the prez gets to look at a player's party membership card, but not their secret role card, like I mentioned before. Special Election, where the president immediately chooses the next presidential candidate, who chooses a chancellor, and a vote then occurs as normal. Afterwards, the presidential placard goes back into normal rotation because no one is supposed to get skipped, and even if it goes to the same player who was just special elected. Policy Peak, where the president looks at the top 3 policies and puts them back in the same order. And Execution, where the president immediately orders another player to be killed. If that player was Hitler, the liberals win. If not, that player does not reveal what team they were on, and from now on cannot speak, vote, or be nominated for anything. If 5 fascist policies are enacted, the president also gains veto power if the chancellor agrees. When the prez hands over the 2 policy tiles as normal, the chancellor can say, "I wish to veto this agenda." If the president agrees to this without saying anything else, the policies are discarded face down and the placard passes to the next player for the next vote as usual, though this will cause the election tracker to move up as if an election failed. Play continues like this until one of the game-ending conditions is met. Either 5 liberal policies are enacted, Hitler is executed, 6 fascist policies are enacted, or Hitler becomes chancellor after 3 fascist policies. Okay, so actually, before I get to the obvious controversy over this game, I actually just want to talk about the game mechanisms and the fact that I really, really enjoy this game. This is going to end up being one of my favorite regular rotation secret role party games, for sure. In fact, I'm going to say tentatively right now, I haven't actually played The Resistance in a while, and I'm sorry, people sometimes hate it when I compare one game to another too much, but it's unavoidable in this circumstance, and I will be comparing this game to Resistance quite a lot. However, I think that Secret Hitler does some things that the Resistance does better, and so therefore this might actually, I'm tentatively saying now, kick Resistance out of regular rotation. And we'll get into all of that. So first and foremost, let's talk about the art style of the game, which I like a lot. They use sort of a sort of funky retro look to it, but nevertheless it has a very sleek and modern design aesthetic to it, if that makes any kind of sense. Like, the game just looks crisp and clean. As part of this was a Kickstarter game, by the way, if you didn't know, very successful on Kickstarter, made over $1 million. And because of that, it's a very simple game. There doesn't have to be a lot of components to it. So they use that extra money to just pimp out the game and make it look really, really good. Now, my Kickstarter edition had a big wooden box to it, but even if it's just the regular box, it looks great. The boards have like foil stamping on it. They just look fantastic. And again, that's not what the game is about. You're barely ever looking at much of the stuff, except when you're enacting policies, or the rare time when you're looking at the cards in your envelope, but nevertheless, it all looks very, very good, and it's all very high quality. The theme of the game, which again, we're going to talk more about very soon, but I do think it's integrated fairly well into the game. Certainly there's this tension, this rising tension in the game, and because you are enacting policies rather than, again, using an example from the Resistance, going out on missions, whatever that means and whatever that entails, it actually feels like you're doing something significant in this game and thematic, as well as nominating a president, and the president nominates a chancellor. All of these things really help the theme along, regardless of the time period it's in. We'll get to it. So going on to the actual gameplay. So many things here are achingly similar to the Resistance, and I would say that that's actually my big beef with the game. If I have a major complaint, and again, I think I love this game, but I think I'm in love with this game, but if I had to pick a major complaint about it, it's that it just couldn't escape the shadow of the Resistance, of its own doing. There's so many things that are very, very similar. But the things that I really enjoy about the game are the things that it takes from the Resistance and makes a little bit better. So, for instance, the whole, like I just mentioned, the whole process of you're nominating a president instead of a team leader, and then that president, rather than choosing a bunch of different team members, and then the game can kind of get into Resistance can get into confusion especially when you're playing with a large number of players. Now it's just you're picking a chancellor, and the chancellor it's a very monumental thing that you're doing, but because it's so focused, because they're picking one particular player, it's very easy for the other players, regardless of what team they're on, to make up their mind whether or not they're going to support that choice or not. And especially in the early stages of the game, it can give you such an amount of critical information about what a person does. And that leads me right into the next thing that I really enjoy. Rather than just like, here's some good or bad cards, I'm going to give you 2 policies. Now, I got rid of one. You have no idea what that is. And now the other player, the Chancellor, has to try and, first off for themselves, figure out, well, why did they give me these particular 2? Now, if you give them, the best thing to do in this game is to give 1 fascist policy and 1 liberal policy. Because then, depending on what they decide to enact, either a fascist or liberal policy, that's going to tell the president everything they need to know about that player. Well, I gave them a liberal and a fascist policy. They chose to enact the fascist policy. But then, the Chancellor can say, no, that's not true. I got 2 fascist policies. I had no choice. I have to enact one of them. To which the president's like, what? Liar! But who are the rest of the people going to believe? So that's actually another small complaint, is that goes into the whole, like, well, in the beginning of the game, who do you believe? There's no basis for trust at that point. And so it's better when gotcha moments like that come later in the game, when the intrigue is already built up quite a bit. Like, oh, wait a minute, I thought you were trustworthy. Why would you do something like that? Maybe you are telling the truth, and now the president is lying. So sometimes, though, the president doesn't have a choice. So that's why in the rulebook it says specifically there's 3 things that can cause a fascist policy to become enacted. The president, the chancellor, either of those 2 by choice, or just the deck by randomness. Which you might hate, that you just get stuck with 3 fascist policies, but there needs to be that little bit of randomness just to leave that kernel of mystery to it. And I love the way that they pulled that off. Again, with very simple mechanisms. This game is fast to learn, fast to play. I love the special powers. I actually think the sweet spot for this game is probably 7 players, because with 7 players, you gain access to the whole width and breadth of the game, and it doesn't feel overwhelming. 10 players, way too much. 5 players, I actually played with. It's fine. It's still good, but again, 7, getting the whole scope of the game is very interesting, because when you get to 7 players as well, on top of the different powers that you get, like assassinating people and getting to look at someone's card, it's, I think you get to assassinate people at any player account, but you also have the idea of there's more fascists, and now one of them is going to be Hitler. And there's a whole other process where, like, now all the fascists know who Hitler is, but Hitler doesn't know who the other fascists are. And it just adds another whole layer to it. So it's actually taking bits and pieces of the expansions of the Resistance and mixing it in, but in a very cool way. High level of tension throughout. If you like that sort of thing, I do. It's very interesting throughout. You never feel powerless in the game. One thing it gets better than Werewolf, another game you might compare this to, is that there's no elimination. You are always involved in this game. You might be a fascist and get de facto eliminated if you're revealed too quickly, and everyone basically revealed, and everyone's like, you're a fascist, but you still have power in the game. So you can still talk, you can still do things, you can still try to influence the vote, and you're going to be president at some point, and then you can start to try to sow some amount of dissent or just chaos, which also benefits those players because, much like the Resistance, you have the track that says every time the vote fails too much, you get closer to chaos where a policy is going to be enacted whether you like it or not. And I really love that tension as well. It's not an automatic game end, but things really start to escalate. So this is a fantastic game. I really enjoy it. Fast to play, fast to learn. Great artwork, great theme. So let's talk about that, because when I did the unboxing for this with my fancy Kickstarter edition, there were actually a vocal minority of people who were upset with me. Nick, how could you lower yourself to review or take a look at a game that, or even just unbox? Maybe that's why, because it was an unboxing. People hate unboxings, but why would you do this to the secret Hitler? You're a couple of people, I swear, said, and over email and on the comments, you are glorifying a monster who killed millions of Jews. And I said, I don't know what to say to that. This is where I have to sound somewhat elitist, because that is so absurd that I can't even fathom that amount of ignorance. This is a game. And not only is it a game, it's a game that's actually handling the subject matter more sensitively than you could possibly think. Maybe it's because people just associate Cards Against Humanity with everything evil in the world, but they went out of their way to come at this from not only an interesting angle, but one that didn't go out of its way to offend anyone. This isn't about glorifying Hitler. It's actually showing you how dangerous it can be. And by the way, this is very telling, or could be very indicative of our modern times, how dangerous one man and one movement can be, and how insidious they can be, and how easy it can be for that movement to gain power and grow in power. And while, again, you don't have to be that high-minded about this game to enjoy it. You don't have to be laden down with history. But if you know your history, and if you know that that's how that happened back in the 30s, and it led to, the most awful war that's ever happened to this world, although World War I was probably a little bit worse, then you would know that they handled this pretty expertly in this game, and that it just gives you that much more enjoyment of it. They even went out of their way, and I didn't show it on camera here, but in the unboxing video you can see they made a very a decent sized graphic novel comic book showing the rise of power of fascists and Hitler in Germany. And I'm sorry, this is one of those situations where you need to pick your battles and die on the right hills, fall on the right swords. This isn't one of them. This game, you can hate Cards Against Humanity all that you want for it being too offensive and you don't get that kind of humor. Fine, I get it totally. Maybe you just think it's a bad game. Maybe you just think this is a bad game. But to say that this glorifies Hitler, that it glorifies the Nazis, that it's making light of a very serious subject, maybe you could say that. But you know what? Enough is enough. Some things need to be talked about. Some things need to be discussed. Some things shouldn't be off limits, especially when it comes to a game that is for intelligent people to converse about, to discuss, to have interesting discussion and dialogue about. I cannot feel sorry or be apologetic for that. I'm just not going to be. So I'm sorry if that offends anyone, but I have limits to my libness, and that's one of them. But in any event, Secret Hitler is a fantastic game. I stand by it. Check it out if you can. I'm sorry, I'm back. I had to make one more point. I walked off camera and I said, no, I got to make this point. And I have to. If you want family-friendly, non-offensive games that don't get a rise out of anyone, no controversy whatsoever, just just, your farming simulator, you're putting meeples out on things, cute cartoony graphics that doesn't have a message, doesn't have a backstory, doesn't have any kind of oomph to it. It's just what it is. You can just play with the family and walk away content. Trust me when I tell you, you have options. All right, there are hundreds of thousands of games, tens of thousands at least, that you can choose from. High quality games, and more are being made every day. Let me tell you, this industry has its roots in very conservative families sitting around playing games that don't offend anyone. That's what this industry has its roots in, and that segment of the board gaming population is never going away, I would imagine, and there will always be games made to cater to them. However, we are at its point now where the demographics of this industry are changing rapidly. And that segment of the board gaming population is becoming the minority, okay? I can't give you stats or figures. I just know what I see, and I see the trends. Younger and younger people of various backgrounds are playing these games in general, the board gaming industry. That has led to its explosive growth. If you expect that every game is going to stay non-controversial, to not offend anyone, to not talk about very disruptive things, to talk about very sensitive issues. If you expect that we will never have any of those things, that all games will be rated G or below, I'm sorry, that's not going to happen. There are going to be more games like Secret Hitler. They will offend you, probably. There will be games that offend me, probably. It's going to happen. And if you can't accept that, all I can say is stay in your bubble. There are lots of safe spaces that you can go to that will protect you from these evil games, and games like Chaos in the Old World, and games like Kingdom Death that have boobies, and you don't ever have to look at them or see them. But there is a point where there's the vocal minority tries their absolute best to impede these games' progress, to try and stamp them out. And, in little ways, they're not successful. But I felt like I needed to say that segment is not going to be the primary consumer of board games very, very soon, if not already. And I can't apologize for that either, because I'm very happy with how the board gaming industry is evolving in this way, to where everyone has options instead of just one segment. I've said my piece.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.